Playing with Power MTG. Powerful cards, powerful formats. Forrest Immel, famous Magic artist, is known for some cards that players may be familiar with. They include cards such as Hex Drinker, Seedborn Muse, and most notable of all, Dockside Extortionist. Forrest is also an active player and content creator for Magic and has been developing his own playmats for trading card games over the last year. He has launched his first Kickstarter campaign. This campaign has amazing art from each of the 5 colors of Magic. I think these are gorgeous and each represents their respective colors perfectly. They are exclusive to this Kickstarter and will not be sold anywhere else. Once they are sold, they are gone forever. Each playmat has stitched edges for more durability, and you can also add an optional signature as well. These will not have things like additional manufacturer or sponsor logos, making sure the art is clean and unobstructed all the way to the edges. You can select any amount of the playmats at the Kickstarter below. Shipping is flat rate and there are only a few days left to pick up yours before the Kickstarter ends. So check out the link in the description and be sure to reserve yours today. Thanks again to Forrest Immel for sponsoring today's video. Now, let's start out by showcasing our fighters this evening. First, we have Ashani piloting Nadu Winged Wisdom. This deck uses Nadu's activated ability to ramp and gain card advantage. It then uses non-deterministic lines in order to draw its deck and win the game. Next, we have Alex piloting the partner pair of Rograkh, Son of Rograkh, and Silas Seeker Adept. This deck seeks to leverage massive card advantage engines such as Wheels, Necropotence, or Ad Nauseam. It then uses these to try and win as fast as possible. After that, we have Matt Sperling piloting Hidetsugu and Kairi. This deck seeks to leverage its commander for both card advantage and a win condition. It assembles infinite mana to cast its commander over and over to win the game. Finally, we have Zeb piloting Lotho, Corrupt Sheriff. This deck seeks to gain mana advantage through its commander. It then assembles one of many Orzhov combos through Bolas the Citadel or Razaketh the Foul-Blooded. Without further ado, let's kick off this faithful, familiar, fanatical fairy tale. Ashani won the Savage Challenge and gets to start us off. Ashani draws a card for turn and plays an Ottawar, Soaring City. He casts a Mystic Remora and passes the turn. Alex draws and plays a Polluted Delta. He cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up an Underground Sea onto the battlefield. He casts his commander, Rograkh, Son of Rograkh. He casts Culling the Weak, sacrificing Rograkh as an additional cost. Remora triggers and Ashani draws. Then Alex adds 4 black. He casts Necropotence. Remora triggers and Ashani draws again. He activates Necropotence 10 times, paying 10 life, exiling 10 cards. He moves to his end step and puts the Necro cards into his hand. He passes, discarding to hand size, exiling the discarded cards. Matt draws and casts a Mana Crypt. Remora triggers and Ashani draws. He plays an island and ends his turn. Zeb draws and plays an Urborg, Tomb of Yawgmoth for turn. He casts a Lotus Petal and Ashani draws through Remora. He casts his commander, Lotho, Corrupt Sheriff. Zeb ships the turn. During his upkeep, Ashani pays to keep his Remora. He draws and plays a Soporific Springs, into play untapped, paying 3 life. He casts a Jeweled Lotus. He cracks it to help cast his commander, Nadu Winged Wisdom. Lotho triggers and Zeb loses a life and creates a treasure. He passes, discarding to hand size. Alex skips his draw step due to Necropotence. In his main phase, he casts a Mana Crypt. Remora triggers and Ashani draws. He casts Rhystic Study. Lotho and Remora trigger, Ashani draws, then Zeb loses a life and creates a treasure. In response, Zeb casts Enlightened Tutor. Remora triggers and Ashani draws again. Then Zeb fetches up an Esper Sentinel onto the top of his library. Then Rhystic resolves and Alex follows up by casting a Mox Opal. Remora triggers and Ashani draws a card. Alex casts Lion's Eye Diamond and Ashani draws again. Alex activates Necropotence 5 times, paying 5 life, exiling 5 cards. He moves to his end step and puts the Necro cards into his hand. He passes, discarding to hand size, exiling the discarded cards. During his upkeep, Matt loses his Mana Crypt roll and takes 3 damage. He draws and plays a Seagate Reborn, into play untapped, paying 3 life. He taps his Seagate for black through Urborg to help cast Talion, the Kindly Lord. Rhystic triggers and Alex draws. Talion enters and Matt names 2. He gives the turn to Zeb. Zeb draws and casts an Esper Sentinel. Rhystic triggers and Alex draws. Zeb moves to combat and attacks Alex with Lotho. Alex takes it and Zeb passes to Ashani. During his upkeep, Ashani lets his Remora die. He draws and plays a Prismatic Vista. He cracks it, pays a life, and fetches up a Dryad Arbor, a breeding pool, a forest, onto the battlefield. He moves to combat and attacks Alex with Nadu. Alex takes it, and in his second main phase, Ashani casts Birds of Paradise. Rhystic triggers and Alex draws a card. Ashani casts Shuko. Rhystic, Esper, and Lotho trigger. Zeb loses a life and creates a treasure, then Zeb and Alex draw. In response, Alex pays 2 life to cast Mental Misstep. Esper triggers and Zeb draws a card. Matt is really kicking himself for not choosing one with Talion, then Shuko is countered. Ashani moves to his end step, and in response, Alex casts Red Elemental Blast targeting Talion. Lotho triggers and Zeb loses a life and creates a treasure. In response, Ashani casts Misdirection for its alternate cost, exiling a blue card targeting Red Elemental Blast. Rhystic and Lotho trigger, Zeb loses a life and creates a treasure, and Alex draws a card. Misdirection resolves, and Ashani redirects Red Blast to Rhystic Study. Rhystic is destroyed, Ashani discards the hand size, and the turn moves to Alex. During his upkeep, Alex wins his mana crypt roll. He skips his draw step due to Necropotence. In his main phase, he plays a Volcanic Island for turn. He casts Defense Grid. Talion and Esper trigger, Zeb draws, then Alex loses 2 and Matt draws a card. In response, Ashani casts Pact of Negation, targeting Defense Grid. Esper triggers and Zeb draws. In response, Alex casts a Force of Will, paying a life and exiling a blue card, targeting Pact. Lotho triggers and Zeb loses a life and creates a treasure. In response, Zeb flashes in, an Opposition Agent. Talion triggers and Zeb loses 2 life and Matt draws. Then Force counters Pact and Defense Grid resolves. Unfortunately for Alex, Opposition Agent really killed his game plan. So, Alex casts a Lotus Petal. He cracks it to cast Dark Ritual, adding 3 black. He casts Yawgmoth's Will. He holds priority and cracks his LED, discards his hand, and adds 3 black. Then Yawgmoth's Will resolves. He casts Lion's Eye Diamond from his graveyard. He casts Lotus Petal from his graveyard. He casts Red Elemental Blast from his graveyard, destroying Talion. He casts Rhystic Study from his graveyard. He casts Dark Ritual from his graveyard, adding 3 black. He casts his commander, Silas Wren, Seeker Adept. He cracks his LED, adding 3 red. He recasts Rograkh. He casts Final Fortune from his graveyard, getting an extra turn. He activates Necropotence 5 times, paying 5 life, exiling 5 cards. He moves to his end step, putting the Necro cards into his hand. He passes the turn to himself. During his upkeep, Alex loses his Mana Crypt roll and takes 3 damage, going to 1 life. He skips his draw step due to Necropotence. In his main phase, he plays a Forbidden Orchard. He casts Arcane Signet. Esper triggers and Zeb draws. He casts Ad Nauseam. Lotho triggers and Zeb loses a life and creates a treasure. Ad Naus resolves and Alex reveals a Vampiric Tutor, killing him. The table laughs, and the turn moves to Matt. During his upkeep, Matt wins his Mana Crypt roll. He draws and plays an Exotic Orchard. He passes. Zeb draws and casts Mox Opal. He plays a Mana Confluence. He casts Arcane Signet. Lotho triggers and Zeb loses a life and creates a treasure. He casts Grim Tutor. He fetches up a card into his hand and loses 3 life. He convokes Benny Brack's Zoologist. He moves to his end step, draws a card through Benny, and passes to Ashani. Ashani draws and casts Scoot Swarm. He plays a Field of the Dead for turn. Scoot Swarm triggers and Ashani creates an insect. He moves to combat and attacks Matt with Nadu. Matt takes it and Ashani passes. At the end of Ashani's turn, Matt flashes in a Teferi, Mage of Zalfir. It resolves and the turn moves to Matt. During his upkeep, Matt loses his Mana Crypt roll and takes 3 damage. He draws and plays a Phyrexian Tower for turn. He taps his lands 4 black through Urborg to help cast Necropotence. He activates Necropotence 27 times, paying 27 life, exiling 27 cards, going to 1 life. He moves to his end step and puts the Necro cards into his hand. In his end step, he casts Born Upon a Wind. Lotho triggers and Zeb loses a life and creates a treasure. Born resolves and Matt draws a card. Unfortunately, he did not get any fast mana or ways to continue, so he discards the hand size, exiling the discarded cards. Zeb draws and casts Vanishing First, exiling Teferi. He moves to combat and attacks Matt with Esper Sentinel and Benny Brax. Matt takes it and dies. In his second main phase, Zeb casts Cruel Claw's Heist. Lotho triggers and Zeb loses a life and creates a treasure. In response, Ashani casts an Offer You Can't Refuse. Esper triggers and Zeb draws. Heist is countered and Zeb creates 2 treasures. He casts Beseech the Mirror, sacrificing Arcane Signet as a bargain. He fetches up an Orcish Bowmasters into exile, casting it. Orcish enters and targets Scoot Swarm. Nadu triggers and Ashani reveals a Windswept Heath onto the battlefield. Scoot Swarm triggers and Ashani creates an insect. In response, Ashani cracks his Wooded Foothills and pays a life. Unfortunately, he forgot about Opposition Agent, so Zeb fetches up a Tropical Island into exile. Then Scoot Swarm dies and Zeb amasses Orcs 1. Zeb moves to his end step, draws through Benny Brax, and passes to Ashani. Ashani draws and casts Arcane Signet. Esper triggers and Ashani pays. He casts Cephalid Illusionist. Lotho triggers and Zeb loses a life and creates a treasure. Ashani moves to combat and attacks Zeb with Nadu. Zeb takes it and Ashani ends his turn. Zeb draws and plays Narid Mesa. He casts Authority of the Consuls. He casts Talisman of Hierarchy. Lotho triggers and Zeb loses a life and creates a treasure. He moves to combat and attacks Ashani with his Orc Army, Opposition Agent, and Benny Brax. Ashani double blocks Opposition Agent with his insects. He takes the rest and Oppo and the insects die. Zeb moves to his end step, draws from Benny Brax, and ships the turn to Ashani. Ashani draws and casts a Feto Alchemist. It enters tapped through Authority of the Consuls, and Zeb gains a life. He moves to combat and attacks Zeb with Nadu. Zeb takes it, and Ashani gives the turn to Zeb. Zeb draws and casts Corpse Knight. He casts Leonin Relic Order. Lotho triggers and Zeb loses a life and creates a treasure. Zeb holds priority and casts Withering Boon, paying 3 life as an additional cost, targeting his own Leonin. Leonin is countered, and Zeb follows up by casting Dance of the Dead. In response, Ashani activates Cephalid Illusionist, targeting Birds of Paradise. Nadu triggers, and Ashani reveals a Swan Song, putting it into his hand. Zeb cannot believe his luck as Ashani casts Swan Song. Esper triggers, and Zeb draws. Dance of the Dead is countered, and Zeb creates a 2/2 bird. With nothing else, Zeb passes, drawing from Benny Brax. Ashani draws and plays a Mana Confluence. He activates a Feto Alchemist, targeting itself. Nadu triggers, and Ashani reveals a Breeding Pool onto the battlefield untapped, paying 2 life. Then Alfeto untaps. He activates Alfeto again, targeting itself. Nadu triggers and Ashani reveals a crop rotation into his hand, then Alphedo untaps again. He casts Tezzeret the Seeker. Esper triggers and Zeb draws. Ashani activates Tezzeret's second ability where X equals 2, fetching up a Lightning Greaves onto the battlefield. Ashani activates Lightning Greaves, targeting Cephalid Illusionist. Cephalid and Nadu triggers, Ashani reveals a Chain of Vapor into his hand, then mills 3 cards. He activates Lightning Greaves, targeting Birds of Paradise. Nadu triggers and Ashani reveals a Dispel into his hand. He activates Greaves, targeting Cephalid Illusionist. Cephalid and Nadu trigger, Ashani reveals an Endurance into his hand, then mills 3. He activates Greaves, targeting Nadu. Nadu triggers, and Ashani reveals a Misty Rainforest onto the battlefield. Field of the Dead triggers, and Ashani creates a tapped zombie. Authority of the Consoles trigger, and Zeb gains a life. He activates Greaves, equipping it to Birds of Paradise, then moves it back to Nadu. Nadu triggers, and Ashani reveals a Polluted Delta onto the battlefield. Field triggers, Ashani creates a zombie, and Zeb gains a life. Ashani cracks Polluted Delta, pays a life, and fetches up an island onto the battlefield. Field of the Dead triggers, Ashani creates a zombie, and Zeb gains a life. He cracks his Misty Rainforest, pays a life, and fetches up a Dryad Arbor onto the battlefield tapped through Authority of the Consoles. Field of the Dead and Authority triggers, Zeb gains a life, and Ashani creates another zombie. Authority triggers again, and Zeb gains another life. Ashani presents a loop of equipping Lightning Greaves to Cephalid Illusionist, milling 3, then equipping it to another creature. He does this 5 times, milling 5 cards. He casts Crop Rotation, sacrificing Otawara as an additional cost. Lotho triggers, and Zeb loses a life and creates a treasure. Then Ashani fetches up a Gaia's Cradle onto the battlefield. Field of the Dead triggers, Ashani creates a zombie, and Zeb gains a life. Ashani presents his loop of Lightning Greaves and Cephalid Illusionist again, milling the rest of his library. He casts Finale of Devastation where X equals 10. He fetches up a Thassa's Oracle from his graveyard onto the battlefield, and all of his creatures get +10/+10 and haste. Thassa's Oracle enters tapped, Zeb gains a life, and with no library, Ashani wins the game. Ladies and gentlemen, what a wild game tonight. Both Alex and Matt went for it with their Necropotents, but unfortunately could not get there. Zeb tried to get his combo off, but was stopped by Ashani, and Ashani finally pulled it all together and won with an awesome line with Nadu. The most valuable card in tonight's game, sponsored by Luxury Playstyle, goes to Opposition Agent. It wasn't always seen in the video, but basically Agent shut down both Alex and Matt during their Necropotence win attempts. Ashani had nothing but tutors in his hand and couldn't do much with it. Opposition Agent had a stranglehold over tonight's games. Many times you don't see the value of some stacks pieces because of the effects they cause. This can frequently cause people to undervalue their impact in any given game. Well, that about wraps it up for this episode. Tune in next time when we duke it out to see who will be king of the competitive EDH table. Thank you so much for watching, and we will see you next time.